Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Rookie Pastors Podcast, casual conversations about real ministry from real pastors. My name's Kyle Neiman. I'm our host for this roundtable edition of Rookie Pastors Podcast. I'm joined by Josh Prince, Bryan Colley, and Dr. Dustin Slayton. Guys, how are we doing today?
I'm cold.
It is chilly.
It is cold.
It is cold and getting colder.
I was glad we moved track practice inside this morning. So.
I don't doubt. I had to just take some things inside my kid's school, and my hands were like hurting. Like it's way too cold, unnecessary. Well, a little peek behind the administrative curtain of Rookie Pastors. This is actually a re-record. We had some technical difficulties on our last attempt at this, so hopefully everything works out here just fine. So. It was my intro question was relevant at the time we recorded. It's not as relevant now, but I still thought it was a really interesting question. So I had read that President Trump had reinstalled his Diet Coke button in the Oval Office, and it just got me thinking. If you could have a button in your office at which you pressed and some sort of snack or drink would just appear, whether it be from an administrative assistant or magically, if you want to kind of imagine that, no matter how the method happens, what would happen if you hit that button, this hypothetical button on your desk? What would appear? Josh, tell me what your magic button would do.
Okay, so I've had time to rethink this, and I have a better answer.
I love it.
Which I'm not changing my answer because y'all hated on my original one, but we'll leave that a mystery for the listeners. I've decided, because most times we have a convenience store down at the end of our street that the church is on, and normally when I go out there because I need an energy drink. So either a Celsius or an Uplift, one of those two energy drinks. I'll take one of those at the button push. I will not change my snack though, because I still stand by the fact that a good protein-rich diet requires pork rinds. So I'm sticking with that.
Requires pork rinds.
Yeah, it's good protein,
Oh,
so I'll
gross.
take it. So energy drink and my pork rinds.
Very good.
No, the energy drinks really go with pork rinds. I don't know. I'm with you on the pork rinds though.
It's my button, Dustin, so I don't care. If you think they go together.
Well,
Yes,
Dustin,
sir.
what would you have?
Well,
happen?
I'm gonna, since you won't let me have Oreos as my option, a triple stuff, quadruple
You can have
stuff
Oreos.
Just
can't have
not the real Oreos.
Triple stuff Oreos.
So I'll stick with my original, which was Dr. Pepper, and for a snack, I had to narrow it down to one that I could just do all the time, anytime. It'd be just popcorn, just some good old buttery movie kind of popcorn. It kind of leaves my fingers greasy, and then I'll go, typing on my keyboard. So it would be some Dr. Pepper and some good movie popcorn. Peanuts would be a close second. Some dry roasted or honey roasted peanuts. Yep. But yeah, that would be my choice for sure.
Our business admin pops popcorn in the office every day. Like, it's just her midday snack. But occasionally she'll burn it. And that's just like one of the worst. Like, just the smell of burnt popcorn just fills a space.
My dad doesn't have the sense of smell, and so he likes burnt things. So burnt popcorn was one of his favorite snacks.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So I saw a reel the other day, or a TikTok or whatever. I don't know what it was. Making popcorn in bacon grease.
Okay.
And you cook it in bacon grease, and then you throw some little like bacon bits in there and sprinkle brown sugar on top of it. And I'm like, that's going to be something I try. And I have yet to do that. But
that's just a reverse pork rind right there.
Yeah, I guess so.
Instead of pork skins and corn oil, you're roasted corn and potato and pig oil. So
something is so much better about that.
Bryan, what about you? What would your magic desk button do?
Yeah, so last time I talked about how at a previous church we had an open field, and I thought it'd be perfect to put a Chick-fil-A and then give me one of the bank vacuum
tube. Yeah, the Chick-fil-A tube to your office.
Chick-fil-A right to my desk every day. But since that is not possible, if Elon is watching, he could make that happen for me. I'm going to go with peanut butter filled pretzels and a good Coke Zero that will just burn when you take that first drink. Actually, if I wasn't, older and worried about dying, it would be a real Coke, because there's nothing like that burn when you take that first sip.
Remember, this is in your church office desk, and calories don't count at the church. So you're good.
Absolutely. Exactly. You can see that.
Well, mine would be for sure a cherry Coke or cherry Coke Zero. I love cherry Coke, but cherry Coke Zero is probably what I should have instead. And then honey roasted peanuts. That's what I would go with. They're not the best for you, but hey, it's my button.
It's your button. That's right.
Well, that's good. I always love to know what people's favorite snacks are and stuff like that. I think it's always a fun conversation, even if you like triple stuff Oreos. And have that sinful glut. That's
by the way, a guy that I'm friends with on Facebook suggested a renaming of double stuff, triple stuff, and that they should be called Morios, not just. I thought that was great.
Morios is good.
Get behind that.
Yeah.
Well, today's our roundtable. We're just getting all four of our hosts together, talking about a topic, and I thought when we were planning this, really, we all thought a good one for us all to sit down and talk about is the experiences with that first time in the quote unquote big chair, the weight and responsibility and the surprises that come with that. So that's what we're going to chat about today. And to kick that off, I would just love to know from you guys, what were the biggest surprises that you encountered when stepping into that lead pastor role for the first time? What caught you off guard the most about that? Bryan, what about you?
I think there's two things. One, prepping a sermon every week, and calendaring a sermon, sermon schedule, just being able to do that and to lean on the text to help keep you original rather than trying to outdo yourself creatively every week. Just let it come naturally to you. The other thing was just the heaviness of, oh wow, it's me now. There's, when you're on staff somewhere and there's a supervisor or whatnot, there's a safety net for you. And I think, Kyle, you said that one time to me, and I was like, oh, wow, I love that. The safety net. If you mess up, somebody can clean up your mess. When you're the lead guy and things go bad or you make mistakes, it's on you. And you've got to quickly figure out, how am I going to handle those things? And am I going to bow up, so to speak, and get defensive, or am I going to be very humble and say, look, I'm still learning, I'm new at this. So yeah.
Josh, what about you?
That I can actually do this, because I spent years thinking there's no way that I could do this thing. It was a lot of me telling the Lord no. So when I finally said yes, there was still that hesitancy. I don't think God knows what he's getting himself into by sending me to a church. So seeing, especially because I don't know if I've told my story as far as getting here. I know kind of those initial conversations we did, but Jess and I knew without a shadow of a doubt that we were supposed to be at Cedar Hill. And it wasn't like we're perfect for Cedar Hill. Cedar Hill is perfect for us. We just recognized without a doubt from almost the get-go that this was where we were supposed to be and that this was going to be our church family. We had no doubt. And so coming in and realizing why it is that the Lord gave us that inclination to see how our personalities matched and how what we were strong in, there was some areas where the church was weak in, but where we were weak, there was areas that the church was strong in. And so it was a good relationships. It was this great partnership that we could help one another. So recognizing God has given me this opportunity. I'm capable of doing it in him. And to see the success, even admit the difficulties and the challenges, how God has redeemed that and used that. That has been such a great encouragement. Like, okay, this is actually something we can do. We're gonna make it after all.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. What about you, Dustin?
Yeah, for me, I think one of the things that was surprising at first is I've always I've always worked on a team. I've always had somebody above me, and always worked with a group of people where you were either equals or you had a senior pastor and a bunch of other equals on that second tier. And so coming into that role where people were looking to you as the leader was just something I guess I wasn't prepared for completely, even though I'd kind of had a little bit of that experience in my previous position. And so, there's lots of times where I'm like, all right, guys, what do y'all want to do? What do y'all think about this? What do you think about this? And I still kind of catch myself at times doing that. But there was one point where, my associate guy came in, he was still here then. And he said, hey, just want to let you know, like, we're cool with you leading and just kind of telling us what you want to do and, what direction you want to go in. We're ready to follow, and so, there were times where, I'd kind of like, what do y'all think? And they're just kind of like, how about you just tell us what we want, what you want us to do.
That's a weird feeling.
It is a really, really odd feeling. And I still struggle with that some because I love to bring a group of people along rather than say, hey, I'm going this way, y'all follow me. So that's still a challenge for me, but I've gotten to where I can embrace that a little bit more. So,
Dustin, I went the opposite. I went from always being on a team to being by myself. And that was a huge surprise about how to do that. And how does that work? And so,
that's a big change too.
Which that's probably the biggest surprise for me was just the loneliness of the role. And we may have shared this in another episode or whatnot. I had a hard time reconciling that I lost my name. I was no longer Kyle. I was pastor. And people still do this. They call me pastor and refer to me without not even Pastor Kyle. It's just pastor said this the other day, and it's just like I that was a weird thing, and it's a really isolating feeling of I have moved into this spot where people have me at an arm's length, and just by the nature of this role, people feeling like I'm more guarded or more off limits. And I remember having a conversation with a new family starting to attend our church. And one of the things they said after they'd been visiting for a while, and I'd had several conversations with them, they said, at the previous churches we've been to, I don't think we've ever had a conversation with the lead pastor. And I'm like, were they like big churches? Like, no. And it's just like people have this attitude towards the seat of pastor that he's over there, don't bother him, sort of thing. And then I think if we're not careful, it just becomes an attitude we embrace of I walk in, everybody's going to be over there, I'm going to be over here. And that's what happens to some pastors where they forget to connect with people. They forget to break down those walls. I was actually meeting with a pastor this morning, and this woman came up to us and said, hey, I just wanted to say hi. I've been spending the past 30 minutes trying to build up confidence to come and tell you hi, but I've been attending your church for a while, and I just wanted to shake your hand. And I know this guy, and he's like, cool, awesome. Like I'm thinking this is like one of the most open people ever, but people fear that. And that's a weird thing to get a hold of, to really wrestle with as a pastor, that some people are going to be more standoffish, which makes you feel really isolated. So that's one of the things that surprised me. And so one of the things I mentioned there about, pastors kind of falling into habits that aren't healthy because of those surprises, those difficulties in pastoring. How do you balance that weight of the responsibility with staying grounded in your calling and doing what you ought to do? How do we balance those things out?
I had a lot of great examples in the church I grew up at. And then probably the pastors that I've had the most respect of have been people who are about, or pastors who are about the people. And so I think that we can be so busy governing a church that we forget that we're actually overseeing people, that we're supposed to be engaging. And, it's not easy. Like I have found that it is more difficult in the role I'm in now, which I guess doesn't necessarily surprise me, but because there's 20 other things in that to-do list, and a lot of times engaging with the church members or giving them a call or going to visit them, I mean, it gets off the list easily. And so there's a lot of things that I have to do. I mean, we're building a website right now and turning over to a new software and all this kind of stuff. And there's a lot of those things that I have to oversee, and it's it's annoying to me. But because it's something I have to do, I'm willing to forsake people for process. And so I need to get back to, I think it's really kind of where I'm at right now. What I'm wrestling with is I've got to focus back on the people. Otherwise you just get busy with the church work. And I think it makes you frustrated. It gets you angry. It causes you less concern for your people. And that's a dangerous place to be. Because when you're disconnected, like you're saying, some of those pastors, whether it's the air that people have towards them where they feel like they can't connect with the pastor, or the air that a pastor has where he makes it feel like you can't connect with me. And so that's what we've got to be cautious about.
Yeah. Dustin, what do you think?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I learned a little bit too late, whenever I first started out, is figuring out how to say no to things that aren't essential to the calling that's been placed on my life, and the calling specifically to be a pastor here at this church at this time and everything. I had some, cool opportunities to serve on some different organizations and boards and just kind of get into some stuff. And I was like, yes, 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 yes. And then I realized, these things had like some long-term commitments, and they take time and all that kind of stuff. And so, right now I think I've got more irons in the fire than I have room in the fire for. And so I'm slowly beginning to start kind of growing out of some of those things and being able to leave some of those things behind, and which is nice. But I think the challenge sometimes for a rookie pastor, especially if you're like somebody who's kind of a go-getter and you want to be civically minded, civically involved, and involved with your association or other churches and stuff, is agree and engage at a good pace. Like, don't just jump into everything, because you can get so overwhelmed with those responsibilities that you kind of, like Josh was saying, you feel like you have to neglect that pastoral duty. And oftentimes that's the thing that gets put on the side, on the back burner, because you got to preach every morning, or every morning. That would be bad. You got to preach every Sunday. If you do Wednesday nights, that's coming every Wednesday and things like that. So whenever you have things that have to be done, the things that maybe you can slide by, like pastoral visits or phone calls or cards or whatever the case may be, those are the things that get left on the back burner. And at the beginning of your pastoral ministry, those are the things that really help you connect with the people the most. Right. And so in a lot of ways, they're the most important. So I think that's a really good word from Josh, and something I've learned as well. How about you, Bryan?
Yeah. I think y'all are spot on that. I think for me, learning, and we're going to talk about this in another episode, the art of delegation, and delegating the right things out. And I think it's real important as you move into, your first pastor or whatever. This is something that I've had to really wrestle with Scripture on, is not only what is a pastor, but what, and this is real tricky because people are like, oh, well, you'll see people say, well, there's no real pastoral authority or whatever. What can I do scripturally? Like, what decisions fall to me? What, how do I minister to people? What is the process of or what is the role of the shepherd? And I think people too often, when they hear the role of the shepherd, they immediately go to the comfort. They're there in the hard times. They're there in the pastoral care. Well, shepherds also discipline. and shepherds have to pull and push people along. And learning that, I really found over the first couple of years that I was in this role of just getting in scripture and learning about being a pastor. Not what seminary taught me, but what does scripture really say? And then finding a group of, like you guys and we talk about Jonathan, Steve, and I have some other guys that aren't afraid to speak into you, that you can share with them, and they're going to shepherd you. They're not going to be, we feel bad for you. Like, I can't tell you how many times in the past 4 years, 3 years, Steve has, I've been on the phone with him. He's like, suck it up. And he's like, I've learned and Steve, if you're listening, I know you are, this is a shout out to you. He's like, I've earned the right to say what I'm about to say to you. And I'm like, I don't want to hear what Steve's about to say. But those are the things that really sharpen you. And they help you get better, because we get tunnel vision on, I'm a process guy just like Josh, and we get tunnel vision on the things that we're passionate about or we're focused on or whatever. And you need somebody to say, hey, and I think they can be church members, but they have to be the right church members. You have to have the right relationship with that. But oftentimes it's better if it's not, because it's not directly, it's directly affecting what you're doing there, but it's not impacting a relationship there of, I still have to shepherd and pastor this person.
Well, if I can follow up on that, because this is what I was going to say about balancing responsibility and staying grounded in your calling, is like accountability is a key thing for me. And that's exactly what you're describing here, is people in your life who can say, who can speak truth into how you're acting, how you are thinking, whether you are going towards kind of a selfish ambition or going towards, again, like what you were describing, a lot more of those systems in the back end and moving away from the pastoral engagement with the people. Accountability is key. And to follow up on what you're saying, Bryan, you were saying, I think it's better when it's outside the church. I think it has to be both. Yeah. I think you have to have those people outside who you can be just brutally honest. Like, I have you guys, but I also have other pastors I talk to. I have friends that I talk to who aren't in ministry, who can hear and give an insight outside of that perspective. That's not loaded with, oh yeah, one time this happened, at my church, you can just hear my heart. We have our family for that as well. But I think those voices need to be within the church, because they're the ones seeing, they're the ones impacted. And so, like, just the other day, I had a lady in my church who pulled me aside. It was Wednesday night, and she was just like, "Kyle, you doing okay?" And I wasn't doing okay. I was really anxious. I was struggling with some things, and I was like, "I'm doing all right, but thank you for asking," because I realized that I was carrying some stuff right there. So I said, "Thank you." And what I did in that moment was, she was doing what I've asked our church to do. I've said it from the pulpit. I've been like, guys, if you see something wrong with me, tell me. If I'm saying something wrong, doing something wrong, tell me. Don't hold it in, because that's not good for any of us. And so she saw something was wrong, and she told me. And so I affirmed that in her. It's not like I'm going to all of a sudden be like, yeah, can we sit down and have a meeting about my deep woundedness? No, that's not the right situation. But I allowed the church to speak in and keep me accountable for when I don't look right, when I'm not behaving properly in the role. So yeah, it's a really healthy thing to build within a church, that accountability. So I think it has to be both.
Yeah.
So
that's a good thing. Let me just add one more thing. I think it's good for a pastor, especially a rookie pastor, and especially if this is your first time as senior pastor, to stay grounded in those other two primary callings. Number one, you're calling to a relationship with Jesus Christ,
Yeah.
because that's the one thing you definitely do not want to neglect, because that's the base foundation for everything that you do. And then secondly, your foundation with your wife and family, because your home sets the tone for how you're going to minister within the church. Timothy, in Timothy, Paul talks about if the elder cannot take care of his home, how can he manage the church, right? And so we need to make sure that we stay primarily focused on those two callings and establishing those. There are going to be seasons of the church where the church is just crazy busy. We've talked about that before on previous podcasts, where you almost have to say, hey, look, I know that I'm going to be gone quite a bit this week, or I'm going to be busy during this summer season, but just we're going to prioritize some things together as a family, and we're going to push through. But staying reminded of those primary things will help you stay grounded in the overall ministry that you have there at the church.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, as we start wrapping up this conversation, in a practical sense, what are some of the strategies, habits, books, the things that you've developed or you've engaged in that have helped you grow in this leadership role, helped you find more comfort in this spot? What are some of the things that you've developed to do that effectively?
So I would have never gone back to seminary if now I had a choice. So like I made the choice on my own, but I'm so grateful for that push. And honestly, at times kind of it felt like a shove to get back to that. And I get that it's not for everybody, and that's totally fine, because I would have argued that case for me even. But getting within the cohort of seminary and working on my doctorate, it's allowed me to think through giving purpose as to why we do what we do. And not just to do it because it's being done elsewhere, not just to do it because it feels like it's a fad or a success at that point. I mean, like, why do we need to do this? And if it doesn't fit into your context, why the heck are you even trying it? Like, why are you wasting your time? You're probably going to isolate people or frustrate yourself or those around you. But that to say, I mean, it's constantly looking for literature and stuff that's going to help you, that's going to encourage you. It's finding guys or women that are further along in ministry and just getting whatever wisdom. Like that's what I appreciate about my doctorate work so far is, my professors are people who have been in ministry for decades, and then they even bring in other people. And so all of that stuff, I mean, it's kind of what we talked about throughout the podcast. It's yes, having friendships like the one we have is important, but we should constantly be looking to challenge ourselves, to open our minds up to things that we don't understand, concepts that are out there that maybe we haven't really explored. And I think sometimes knowing what doors we need to shut versus, what we need to open is super helpful. So I know I'm not saying that, well, go get your doctorate and ministry will be great and your pastorate will be better. But I would say some of those degrees, as far as, literature and people, have been a great aid for me.
Josh, I want to add something to what you said. And so, you're talking about education and the, it's not for everybody, and some people will feel called to do that. And I know you mentioned it, your doctorate, your DMin there at New Orleans, which we'll have to start calling you doctor here in a few months. So,
and I will.
Nice. Yeah, absolutely.
I appreciate it.
But I do think there's a trend right now that it's almost cool and hip to say, "Oh, I don't need seminary," and you see that in some primarily younger generations right now. And usually, whenever they talk about that, they're talking about going to get their master's, getting an MDiv or something like that. I really still feel like an MDiv is pretty essential for a pastor. You could make the case that you could get a Master of Arts and Theological Studies or something like that. But I really feel like an MDiv is not just a stepping stone degree. There is so much benefit to being in those classrooms, taking those studies. And even if yours isn't an MDiv, if it's a Master of Arts and something else, that's fine as well. Just taking that extra step of education past the bachelor's is something that I think really does contribute. And I know it's not for everybody, and that's fine. But if it's a possibility for most of our pastors, I do think it's something that will benefit in the long run. So, Kyle, do you have something you want to add to that? You want to punch me back?
No, not at all. Actually, I think I shared in our very first episode when we were telling our stories. So I'm the one here without a master's. So I'm the least educated of the group.
But he has the most street cred. So
I do. I have so much street cred. It's unbelievable.
But
that's what the other guys say. They don't want to do their masters because they want to be like Kyle.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Greatest preacher in America.
But here's the thing. I think I said this. Gosh, I think I said this. Like, it was a pastor speaking to me, and he was like, "You don't need to go to seminary. Just jump in and do ministry." And I took that to heart, and that's what I did. And I was doing 40, 50-hour work weeks on intern pay, which most of the time was $0. Like, I dove right in. And so here's what I would say. What I would say is, if you do not go into seminary, that means a ridiculous amount of work. I mean, and it was like, I was putting in more work than seminary would have been. And I was knee deep every day in just the difficulty of working in ministry and diving right in, and diving in without like the kind of theological parachute. Like, anybody asks me a question, I'm like, I will find out. And I'm studying incredibly hard when there are curriculums in seminary that are meant to build up that knowledge base for you. I had to do a lot of work. So looking back, I'm like, well, that was dumb. Again, what you're saying, Dustin, is yes, it is not for everybody. And I don't know if I would be in ministry in the role that I'm in had I not done what I did. But seminary is important, and we need to encourage people who are looking at this calling and feeling called in ministry to pursue that education. You don't have to pursue it in the traditional way. Like, I am taking online classes for my MDiv right now. Like, I'm working full-time in ministry and just taking little bites out of my MDiv, and I'll get there eventually. You don't have to do in the traditional way, but get educated. Like, it's a very helpful tool. So no, I support that as the non-master here.
Yeah, I have the lesser master. I have the theological studies.
The one that Dustin looks down on.
That he totally
the one that I completely slammed. You start sometimes on this, you start saying something like, wait, I said that wrong. How can I back this up and restate in the flow?
Yeah.
No, I support you, though.
So if any seminary wants to sponsor us, since we're talking about the wonders of seminary. But my seminary story was I started right a year, not even a year out of college, and started with an MDiv, got into the languages, and then quickly moved to Christian ed because I was going to be a youth pastor for the rest of my life. And this was I'm going to date myself. This was pre-online. And now this is the cool thing. You can do everything online now. So it's so easy and it's cheaper in a lot of cases. And, so I did a couple semesters, or I think 3 or 4 semesters, and in different forms and fashions, extension campuses and on campus in Fort Worth. And then I moved to Tulsa, and it was not feasible for me to be able to do it. And I stopped seminary for 14, 15 years, and was that guy that was like, I don't need it. And the farther I got into ministry, the more I realized what you're talking about, that theological safety net I didn't have it. And it wasn't like I knew how to do church work, but I didn't have the theological foundation that I needed to do what I was doing. And so I started looking and saying, all right, how can I get this in a practical, way that's going to give me something? And so, so I went back and did everything online. And I think if you can go in person, there's value to being in the classroom, because the conversations that happen in the classroom or on the break or between classes are valuable to you. But if you can only do it online and just do what you can. I do want to add something to that also. I know we're probably running long on time. I was also that guy that was starstruck by conferences on leadership. And so any big name conference that was going on, I was there. I was taking copious amounts of notes. I'm going to be the best leader I could ever be. And what I discovered, and there's nothing wrong with conferences at all. I love them. But what I discovered over time was they weren't always teaching me how to be a shepherd. They were teaching me how to be a corporate leader in a church context. And there's value to that, but you're a shepherd first. And I had to reevaluate. I found a book. I was actually given a book at my first church by one of the elders and never read it. And then I've read it probably 5 times in the past 8 years. And it's called They Smell Like Sheep by Dr. Lynn Anderson. And it is a great leadership book on how to be a pastor and how to be a shepherd. And that, I think that helps. It's easy to fall into the trap of, I've got to go learn from these guys because they have grown their church exponentially in so many amount of years, and they're really doing cutting edge ministry. It's great. Learn what you can from them, but you've got to find your context and remember that you're the shepherd of your flock.
Yeah. I mean, all these books and seminars and webinars and all this stuff, they are helpful because they get you ideas. They continue to push you to try new things. But in with all of it, you have to remember they are writing these books and doing these seminars for a very broad spectrum of churches, broad spectrum of pastors, and they're casting a very wide vision. And everything needs to be driven towards your context. And so always be thinking about your people. We talked a lot about education. We kind of got a little off from the original question, which is great. It's not a criticism. It's actually Josh's fault. You're the first one to bring it up. No, but just from a practical day-to-day sense, one of the things I would say to a rookie pastor is you need to plan out what your week looks like and find a good solid routine, and understand that routine is going to change because you're going to realize sometimes things work and sometimes things don't. But I would say you need to schedule for the shepherding time. Schedule time to I am going to go visit somebody. I'm going to do my hospital visits. I schedule writing postcards, handwritten notes to people in my church. Schedule time to go with an intention for evangelism is one of the things I would say. I started doing this last year where I'm every Thursday, I am going to go and intentionally be evangelistic. That doesn't mean that's the only time I'm sharing the gospel, but I am making sure that's part of my schedule. Because if I want our church to be evangelistic, I need to make it a priority even as I'm planning. You schedule when you're writing your sermon. You schedule when you're doing meetings with staff. You schedule these things. And you also hold those things loosely and understanding it's going to shift around. And so that's a strategy that I would encourage. Just come up with that, write it down, put it in a Google Calendar. That's what I do. But with one of the things that we brought up before when we originally recorded this that I think is really helpful is understand that we all have certain limitations. So I have ADHD, and I realized the second I got into this role that this could be a problem. It could be destructive, where I could manage it on my own. I realized there are going to be areas I was going to let people down. And so I sought help for it. I got medication for it and worked very closely with my doctor so that I could have something that kind of curbs some of those tendencies and helps me stay just a little more focused. It's not for everybody, but be willing to notice those weaknesses and do whatever it takes to address them. Whether it be talking to a counselor, talking to a doctor, or just in the accountability that you have no matter what your weaknesses are, don't be too prideful to address them. So
yeah, don't be afraid. And depression and anxiety is super high among pastors because we just carry the weight of so much. And Kyle, like you said, don't be afraid to talk to your doctor. Get a good counselor. You don't see them every week, but that you have a check-in with them. And and don't be afraid if you're really starting to feel like not yourself. Talk to your doctor about getting on something that'll help you. It's not something you have to be on lifelong or whatnot, but just that will get your levels back balanced, and you can be the best you can be. Because we think, and people think this of us, we're pastors, so you've got your whole spiritual life figured out, and you can handle stress, you can handle pressure, you can handle everything, because you're the pastor and you're in the Word for 7 hours every morning, and then another 4 hours on your knees in prayer. You need someone to be that for you. You need a pastor yourself, and whatever form or fashion that is, take care of yourself, because that's going to make you a better leader for your people.
So basically what I've heard is the guys who with their doctorates or getting their doctorates are like, hey, invest in education. And us other guys invest in drugs. That's what I just heard.
I see a reality show there.
Let's sign off.
So,
sign off on that.
Yeah. We have our episode. We have our episode title right there.
Yeah, there it is. There it is.
Doctorates or drugs?
No, making jokes about serious stuff. That's what I do. But no, but in all seriousness, don't be too prideful to keep yourself from asking for help, whether it be medical help, counselor help, or accountability help. Talk to people you trust, and it'll help considerably with adapting to this role, is what I'd say. Well, guys, as we wrap up, anything you'd like to add, anything you just nuggets of wisdom that you just cannot end this episode without sharing?
No, I mean, you mentioned books a while ago. There's tons of, guide to pastoring kind of books out there. You go all the way back to Criswell's Manual for Pastors or whatever it was called. And John Bisagno was the one. We used his whenever I was in my undergrad.
That's a great one.
Find you one of those, guidebooks for pastors. That's all. They've always got really good nuggets of how to do things. One book that I've read that's actually it's kind of funny. It's from a small town church pastor in Florida. You would never hear of him, and probably never hear of the book, but it's called Smitten Shepherds, and it's about just kind of the struggles that you go through as a pastor, how to navigate the difficulties, and written from a pastor's heart. And
That's awesome.
It's got some really interesting wolf heads photoshopped on sheep's bodies on the front, and it's a good book. You can find it on Amazon. So, just something to kind of read to help you through those things as well.
Yeah, I think getting one of those pastor guides. I have a minister manual, another word for it. I got one of those, and it's been so helpful just with stuff like, funerals and weddings and organizing worship services and counseling and all these things. Just little nuggets. It's a really helpful tool. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, I want to throw one more thing out there that don't have to go into detail with. It's more of a practical, logistical thing. Because we're all, even, the four of us are all in Baptist churches. And even with that, our polity probably looks a little bit different. Learn that your polity structure of your church, and what your boundaries and limitations are, through policies, procedures, bylaws, so that you don't unintentionally set off a landmine, and just know, but don't be afraid to push those if you need to.
I think that's a whole other podcast. We'll have to write that down, because I really think, navigating church polity is a really big thing. So let's make sure we put together an episode for that here in the near future. All right. Well, guys, thank you for your insight on that. Really great discussion. And our prayer and our hope for anybody who is listening to this is that these stories, our experiences are helpful to you as you adjust to that, because we've been there. We're still feeling that in a lot of ways. And so we hope it is a help to you. Know that you're not alone in this. there are a lot of people who feel the things that you're feeling, and we would love to be a resource and continue to be a resource for you. So thank you so much for listening. Give us a follow on the social medias if you could. Rookie Pastor Pod on everything except for Twitter, which on X. On X, it's just Rookie Pastors. So follow us, and then whatever service you're using to listen to this, give us a rating if you could. That just helps us get in front of more eyes and ears of people who are hopefully looking for the same helps that brought you to this. So thank you so much for listening. We will see you next time on the Rookie Pastors Podcast.
Later, guys.